Okay, hi everybody, this is Rob Galvin. Thanks for joining for today's RhoMobile Suite webinar. Today I will be your presenter for the topic of the week. This week we actually shifted gears a bit. We're going to be covering the data access and how to do that most efficiently in your RhoMobile application. Originally we were planning on talking about the new 2.2 release. I was kind of hoping the software would have been available today. It should be available by the end of the week, I hear. So we pushed that webinar out 1 week, so we'll look to cover the next topic of RhoMobile Suite 2.2. Adam Blum will be presenting that next week. So be sure to adjust your calendars and make sure you register for the upcoming webinar. We're going to cover some new features and give some demos, and we want to make sure that the software is available for you to download so you can kind of play along with it, as we go through the webinar. In case you missed the last one, the last week, actually it wasn't last week, I was on vacation last week. The week before, I did a presentation on building iOS apps, so iPhone, iPad apps with RhoMobile Suite. And this took you through the process of the complete process from, logging onto the Apple developer portal and creating your developer provisioning for files and the certificate handling, all of that stuff, in order for you to get your application on a real device so you can test it. I kind of re-recorded the webinar just to add some more color and clarity around some steps that I was not able to complete during the live presentation. So even if you sat through that one and you may have missed some points, you may want to watch the replay, and it's up there on Launchpad. So be sure to check it out. I think it actually the recording turned out pretty good, so I think you guys will like that. And again, like I said, in the past couple of webinars, be sure if you're interested in doing any guest speaker opportunities, a partner, developing an application, a great plugin, or even internally if you want to contribute to the community on some things that you become an expert on, feel free to reach out to me, and we'll get that set up. The next couple of webinars, what I'm trying to do is turn my attention more towards RhoConnect. We haven't really covered that quite in detail lately, so we want to spend some time discussing some new features in RhoConnect, and as well as do some refresh webinars having to do with RhoConnect. So we're looking to cover that in the next couple of topics. And then I have a list of feedback that I've already gotten on some previous webinars that I'm working on for the future as well. Okay? All right, so let's get started with today's presentation. This is about data access. So that we've done quite a bit around performance in general over the past couple of weeks in the form of webinars and blogs. And I hate to, kind of beat a dead horse, but one aspect we didn't really cover was the local database handling, right? And just in working with some customers and implementing, I've seen some things that have been happening consistently, and I want to cover a couple of specific topics with data, local data, and talk about that in greater detail. I've seen some people continue to make some mistakes in terms of not making sure their application is running the best when it comes to loading data and showing data. So I'm going to spend just a quick couple of minutes talking about our data model choices that we have inside of RhoMobile Suite or RhoMobile. You probably heard this before. I'm gonna go through that rather quickly just to kind of refresh, right? And then we're going to jump into some demonstrations on an application that I've been working on that shows how to load when you have a data set you want to have pre-populated. You want your application pre-populated with data. You have to create many records. How can you do that efficiently? And I'll show you some timing differences and how to go about doing that. And then another aspect of once the data is in your application, some different ways for handling, displaying that data, right? And particularly when it comes to lists, and then also particularly when it comes to selecting that data when it in terms of conditional selects. So we're going to go through some live code and some demos. First couple of slides will be slides. You may have seen these before, okay? And then a good starting point that I just wanted to mention is on the doc site. There's a QR code for it. This is has really all about our ROM, our database abstraction layer ROM, and APIs and different ways you can go about doing it. And a lot of materials is covered there. So it's a good starting point when it comes to utilizing our features, our database features inside of RhoMobile. So really from a high-level point of view here, your application really kind of has two choices in touching the database. One is through our ROM APIs and our ROM access. This is a RhoMobile-specific way of doing things. And then there's also, you can do things traditionally via SQL. As you may know, under the covers, the database is a SQLite database on most platforms. And if you're very familiar with SQL, the SQL API, in most cases I see a lot of people using our ROM APIs. It makes it a lot easier to access the database from this kind of consistent point of view. And then under those covers, you really have two choices, and I'll spend a little bit of time talking about them, is setting up your data so that it's using this property bag mechanism for your models, or using a fixed schema, right? And I'll spend some time talking about that now. So a property bag is kind of our default out-of-the-box way of setting up your data. You've seen a lot of demos already probably on how easy it is to create inside of RhoStudio a new data model. We have a wizard, and you just basically plug in those properties, and you're off in accessing data and creating records and updating all that good stuff, right? Property bag is very good in that it's very simple to use, as I mentioned, and there's no schema to maintain. So if your schema is constantly changing, you're adding properties, adding fields, adding new models, it makes it very easy to do data migrations from systems and mapping those. And synchronization also fits quite nicely with that as well. The attributes can be added and removed really without having to maintain and become a full-blown DBA. And you can really just easily create new models, new properties for models without too much trouble. It is very fast as well, right? And that everything is indexed, right? So it's a single table type of scheme. Every property, every model, everything is indexed for performance reasons. And because of that, one of the downsides possibly, depending on the size of your data, is that the database physical size of the file could be larger than a fixed schema, right? So that's one of the trade-offs. And for the most part, the demos that I'm going to show later on in the presentation are going to talk about and really focus on the property bag. The other choice you have is setting up your data models using fixed schema, right? And I think this is more for the people who are very fluent with, configuring and setting up databases. They know table structures. They know how to set up indexes. You want that granular control and administration. It is more administration in terms of making sure your schema changes are, throughout your code and managed efficiently. So that is one of the downsides of doing this. However, if the actual file size is a premium, then in this case you may want to choose the fixed schema because your database physical file size will indeed actually be smaller in some cases. And I would urge those to do a comparison just so you can see which way, if this is really worth the downside of having to maintain the schemas and having to maintain your indexes. If you don't properly set up the indexes for each of your data models, then you won't have the best performance, right? So there are some downsides and things for you to consider. For those of you who are new and are just using RhoMobile, I would just stick with the property bag to get you going, and then once you get down the road, you can look at the two and compare and see what choice is best for you. As I mentioned, one of the things you need to worry about in the fixed schema model is making sure that you create indexes, right? And like I said, this is more for the person who is familiar with DBA types of activities like creating indexes. So if you're in this particular case, we have a product model, and there's only 2 fields here, which isn't so glamorous, but a lot of our forms in this particular application would probably be doing lookups by name or brand, or name and brand. And I want to make sure that the database has an index, so this way I'm getting the quickest return on my selects and updates, etc. And I would need to specify this in the models file. All right, so normally when you set up a property bag, you don't need to worry about doing this. You just kind of define your data models, and you're good to go. In this case, you actually have to, get into the code of the data model, set up the different properties, what types of property it is, whether it's a string, an integer, what have you, and really kind of set up the schema and set up the indexes that way. So be sure to do that. I see a lot of people just kind of forget, and they may actually set it up at one point, but they don't go in and review those when it comes time to making database changes. So, all right. So before I jump into the demo, I want to talk about creating records. Okay. There's kind of two ways you can do it. One way is not the best way. The other way is better. All right. Is the most efficient way. The first way is, so in this case, you see some code here, and the account in blue here is basically our account model. And we're using a ROM API .new to establish a new record, okay? And then we're going in and setting the property values, name and address, and then applying the save. So this, in fact, is not the best way to do it because you're effectively creating the record, and then updating attributes and saving it to the database, almost like 2 or 3 operations, when, in fact, you can really do this all in one single operation. And we provide another API, .create, for actually creating the record all in one swoop, which is a lot quicker. And especially when you have to do multiple creates, this is the most efficient way to do things. And it's very similar to up above in that I'm actually passing in a hash, a Ruby hash, with the properties and the values. Okay, so you can create your hash up above, and actually I'm going to show this to you in my application. And then you pass it in via the account.create method to create that record. So that's the most efficient way to do things. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about this and actually show this to you in my application. So now let's say in my application I needed to create around 600 records when the application started. Okay. And I've seen a lot of people do this as well, is that, maybe they'll have a local file. In my case, it was a JSON file. In other cases, they may be pulling it down from a web service. But they have this chunk of data that needs to go in. But it doesn't have to be an application startup. But at some point, they may need to load a large amount of data. And even though they decided to use the create method and just kind of, looping through here, in this case, I'm looping through my JSON, creating a hash, and defining those properties, and then I'm using that create method that I just told you was the best way to do it, and they're still saying, hey, this is slow, right? So what I'm going to show you now is effectively you can do that same thing, but you need to wrap it in such a way so that it's actually performing a lot better, and I'm going to show you this in the application in a minute. So what you really need to do here is you need to wrap any sort of repetitive large transaction. You need to wrap in this like kind of transaction statement. So in this case, what I'm doing, and you can see it's only like 6 lines of code, and effectively what it's doing is for the model that I'm working on, I'm getting a reference to it. Okay, that's the first line here, and I'm starting a transaction, and then I'm doing that same exact code, looping through my creation of records, but when I'm done with the loop, I'm doing a database commit. So it's kind of, it's writing to the database in one shot instead of writing throughout the loop. And then you just have, whenever you do a begin, of course, if something fails, we'll do a rollback. So and I'm going to show you this now, real time. Just by doing this, it greatly improves performance for multiple creates. And it doesn't have to be a create. You could be updating multiple records as well. The same concept applies. All right, so now let's switch over to, let's go to the demo here. All right, so I'm using Sublime Text 2. I showed this in a previous webinar, how to do this with your Rho applications. It's great for doing webinars because I can insert things very quickly. And so anyway, so don't get confused by that. But let me just show you the application really quick, and then what I'll do is I'll show you how this changes things, right? So I started this new hobby a couple of months ago. I have a saltwater reef tank, and I buy fish, coral, shrimp, all these things all the time. And I wanted an application when I'm in the store to look up all these different species, maintain my my water parameters, set up some maintenance on my tank reminders, and kind of keep track of who's in my tank, right? So, this is a very, kind of personal type of application or consumer application, but the same concepts apply, right? So what I'm doing here is, let me jump to the code. Let me just close the simulator. So when the application first runs for the very, very first time, I essentially set up the data. And I have these JSON files for the different types of species that I'm going to be including in my library. Okay, so let me just take a look at that so you can actually see it's a pretty significant amount of data, right? So here's my fish JSON file. And you can see to the right that it has quite a bit of data. For each record, I have a description. There's many properties about, the care level on that particular species, the temperament, all these different parameters that apply to this particular fish, right? So there's about 300 of those. And then I do the same thing for my other species, so coral and invertebrates, right? And I effectively, load the JSON file, go through it, and then I call this routine create data, which I'll show you in a second. Okay, so in the create, there's some things I'm doing just to kind of set up the different properties and reading, and then I'm building this hash, and then here's my .create, okay? In this case, I'm creating this particular, fish record, and I'm saving it. I'm passing in this hash value. So before I do that, right, before I'm looping through my JSON loop, I'm wrapping the database, the loop here in this database transaction, the same thing that I just showed you before. So now I'm going to run this. Actually, before I run this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in some like a timer display. All right. So I have this little snippet here that I created, and so effectively what I'm doing is I'm just creating this prompt to show you when I run this how long it takes. It's just as a time stop, time now and a time end, and it's going to display that once this reset routine is done. So let me go ahead and I'm going to delete my Rho simulator folder so it seems like it just runs for the very first time. So when the application loads for the very first time, you can see that it took 606 milliseconds in this case to execute that routine, and that's with those the transaction blocked out basically, right? Where I wrap the loop with the transaction. So now let me go ahead and do the same exact thing. Delete the Rho simulator folder so we can do the same test. But in this case, what I want to do is I'm going to do it the bad way, and I'm going to comment out. Oops. I'm going to comment out this this transaction, and we'll just comment these out as well. All right, so now I'm kind of doing it the bad way, and let's see how long it takes. So we'll kick off the build, and immediately I can tell like something is not running so great, right? The UI is blocked, and it looks like it's hung, but I'm just going to let it sit here for a little while. And all I did was I effectively took out that transaction, and you can see that it took 16,000 milliseconds or 16 seconds in comparison to a half a second or 600 milliseconds. So quite a huge, quite a staggering difference just for a couple of lines of code that you need to wrap, right? And that's a huge savings, right? And that was really, if I added up all the records across the different things that I'm doing, it's less than 1,000 records. I know that's not huge, but if your records are even larger than that amount, that's gonna be a huge savings. And there's probably some other optimizations I can make in there that I haven't done yet. But I just wanted to show you that from a simplistic point of view, how to do that. So now you might say that, okay, that's great, Rob. There's a couple other things that you could still do to optimize that I didn't have in the code. One of the things that I want to point out, which is important as well, and this is even more important when you have even more data than I do, is that when you're in the Ruby controller, the Ruby garbage collection is not running. So if I'm sitting there and doing, looping through those records like I was before, creating, even though I wrap the transaction in there, garbage collection is not running, and it could actually, slow down and bog down the device. So what you want to do, and I don't have this in my code, but I wanted to point this out to you, is to force garbage collection to turn it on. So this is just a simple gc.enable before you do those heavy operations and go through that loop. Okay, it's a very simple thing you can do, because this way it's always on when you have to do some pretty heavy operations inside of your Ruby code. Now you notice that in my application, when I was doing without the transaction wrapping, it actually blocked the UI, right? So maybe in your case you might have a lot more records than I do, and even after you wrapped that block in a transaction, it still is not quick enough, right? You want it quicker. You want your application to come up quicker from a usability point of view. So what you want to do is you want to avoid blocking the UI. When you're going through that routine, creating those records, it's actually blocking the HTML and JavaScript from running. The Ruby is hit first, then the HTML and JavaScript, and so you don't want to block that interface from being displayed. You may, in fact, want to show a loading progress or a loading bar, progress bar, as you're creating the data. It gives the user some impression that the application is not hung. So the way to do that is you would basically come in here. Let's say this is the start of your view, right? You would come in here and you would do it asynchronously. Okay, so you would make a call, right? It's almost like an AJAX call to the method where you're actually doing your looping. Okay, so now it's not blocking. So the way it's going to work is it's going to come through here. It's going to kick off this asynchronously, and it's going to continue. Excuse me. It's going to continue and render your page, and you would set it up so that your page has some sort of progress indication. And then this is actually doing the heavy operations and looping through the records. And then you may actually want to call back to that JavaScript and display some progress, right? And then at the end, once you're done, you might want to change to the page to display the records, right? So this is how you would do it to make sure that you don't block the UI. I didn't have time to actually implement this in my demo application for this call, but what I'll try and do is I'll try and put together a small example just to show this with even a larger set of data, 10,000 records, what have you, so this way you can see how this actually works. But theoretically, this is how it works: is you effectively do it asynchronously, and this way, at least the user interface will come up quite quickly. Okay, so now you say, okay, Rob, I have the data in my application. Now I want to display it. I see a lot of people still use lists to display data, common thing everybody uses since the Stone Ages here. But there's many different ways you can do it, and I just want to show one way where just by changing a couple of things in your selection of the data, how you can actually make it more efficient. Okay, so here's a cool thing I see all the time, is that, like I come to my index method, which is going to show the, the list of your models, and I see, the model.find all. So it's going to go and get everything. And then inside view, you're basically looping through those and displaying those. And in fact, this is what we do in our default application generation. When you generate a model inside of RhoStudio, this is what you get. Okay. Now, if you have a huge set of data, and even mine is not really huge in my application, this is really not the best way to do it. And I'm going to show you how this looks, right? Even with a small set of data that I have. A better way to do it is to utilize our ROM APIs to do pagination. We already have this built in. You don't have to do a whole heck of a lot to your code to take advantage of pagination, all right? So in this case, I'm calling the same model, but instead of find, I'm doing .paginate, and I'm saying, okay, I want page number blah. In this case, the first page starts off with 0, and then I want, this many per page, right? So this is a typical way of doing things. And then you can still utilize that same code for displaying your view, but then, of course, you have to create some method to, go through the different pages of data sets. And I'm going to show you how I did that in my application. Okay. So let's go back to my wonderful world of fishes. And what we're going to do is I'm going to show you inside of this fish routine that I'm effectively on my index page. Here's the bad way, all right? I'm going to do a .find all, and I'm going to go through and show the fish, right? So let me kick off that build again. You see there was a little delay there in the page actually coming up, okay? And that even if I start kind of, trying to scroll, it's kind of clunky, right? Remember, there's like 300 records here being displayed on this page. And it's kind of it's very choppy, in fact. I don't know if you're seeing this on the webinar, but it's very choppy, all right? So let's turn on pagination instead of actually displaying the whole thing. So in this case, there's really not that much difference in doing the call. I'm doing .paginate and effectively saying, give me the first page and only show 20. Okay. So now I didn't actually handle the pagination yet, but I just want to show you, it came up a lot quicker and the scrolling is a lot better. All right. And now, in fact, I could make it even better. Instead of actually, hold on. Let me show you this again. So you can see I'm only fitting, 3, 6, maybe 10, depending on the device. So of course I would probably want to have some sort of conditional code in here to check to see the size of the display and kind of calculate how many records and adjust this per page, right? Even cutting it in half. Well, in fact, you know what? Let's do the timer. Let me show you the difference in doing the find all and then just the pagination, right? So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the view, because I actually want to display once the view is done instead of just in here, okay? So let me go into the fish index page here, and I have it already in there. So I'm going to start the timer before I'm going through the loop, and at the end, I'm just going to show an alert that tells you how long it took, okay? So now let's kick that off. So you can see that it took 6.51 milliseconds, right? So this is for about 300 records. It took about 6 milliseconds to actually display that, okay? Which you might not think is too bad. It's, but it could be a lot better, right? So now let's go in here and just load the 20. And of course, it's going to be a lot quicker, right? But just so you can kind of get an idea of how long it takes, and it's 0.42 milliseconds. Right, so that's a huge difference and to the user, like, hey, this is what I see no matter if I'm loading 300 or 100. So now I effectively need to, come in here and turn on that, enable the pagination so I can go through. Now, before I just, scroll down, the user is going to flick down and kind of see, see what's in the list, right? So they're going to be doing this, and they're going to be scrolling through. So I don't want to add a button to say page next, page back. It's, kind of cumbersome. So I just want to keep that same, like infinite list, right? You've seen this on other applications like Facebook, whatever, where you get to the end of the list and it says loading, and then all of a sudden you see a whole bunch of more things pop in. So that's the effect that I want to give here for my application. So let's show you how to do that. So now that I have where it's pulling in the pages, there's a couple of things I need to do, right? So the first thing is I want, like I said, when the user gets down to the bottom of the screen, I want it to load more data, okay? So let me jump back into that index view. And the first thing I'm going to do is, actually I already have it in here, I forgot to uncomment it out, but I'm adding this div tag down at the bottom. Okay, so this is at the bottom of the list. I'm going to display this loader.gif, which is just like a spinning, spinning indicator. Okay, so the user at least knows that something is going on. Okay, now what I have to do is that now I have to trigger that loading of more data once I hit that section of the screen. So here's the code right here. This little script block. So what this is doing, and I'll just kind of walk through this really quick, there's really not much to it. Utilizing our jQuery mobile syntax here, and I'm saying when the window scrolls, check to see the top of the scroll, and if it's effectively the bottom of the screen, right, I'm going to go into this section of the code, and I'm going to calculate my next page. And the way that I'm doing it is really just kind of storing it in a hidden element right up here. I just kind of hide the page number, and you can do it different ways, but this is the way I chose. I just set it to 0 initially, and then I'm going to read that value, increment it by 1, and then here's where I'm doing my AJAX call, right, my asynchronous call to a method that I'm going to create, okay, in my controller to load more, and I'm going to pass it in the next page. All right, so in this case, it's going to go to page 1, right, and I'm going to do that code that I showed you before for loading more, okay? And then if it's successful, I'm essentially going to append the HTML that is generated from this particular call to that list, okay? And then I'm going to update the value inside of the page placeholder. And then for jQuery mobile, I actually need to call this refresh mechanism. Otherwise, what you'll see, as I found out, that the styling is not there when you adjust things kind of dynamically, right? It originally happened on page load, so you need to make this call here to add the styling that jQuery mobile provides to that. And then in the case of if there was no HTML found, I'm actually going to display no more records to show. Okay, so that's kind of the call to retrieve the data and to add it to my UI, just like that. Now let's look at the load more function here. Okay, so here it is. It looks very similar to my select before, right? Where I'm passing in the page number, so I'm retrieving it from the parameters. I'm converting it to an integer, and in this case, I'm calling my model .paginate instead of page 0. I'm just doing, the page that I'm passing in. Okay, and that puts things in this species fish collection. Okay, and normally when you're loading a page as in before, you would just render that view. But remember, I'm already in the view. I'm already in the index view. I just want to add to that. But I still want to take advantage of the Ruby view concept. So in this case, I'm actually rendering what's called a partial. Okay? So I'm rendering a partial, and I'm naming my partial more, and I'm going to pass in this collection so it's available inside of this Ruby view, this partial Ruby view. Okay, and I'm passing in the species fishes, which is what I used before. Okay, so I hope you guys are still with me. So now, remember, I made this call to load more. Now I retrieve the data set. I have it in a collection. I'm going to send it over to this partial view. And in this case, you want to notice that the name of the view is underscore more. So when I reference things as more, the name of my file has to proceed with an underscore. That's just like a Ruby on Rails, Ruby type of concept when it comes to partials. So make sure that you are keeping the names consistent and you have that underscore. So let's take a look at that partial view. The partial view is essentially that same code block that I used in the main main view here, right? The same exact code block. I just copied and pasted. I just copied and pasted in here, and this time this is the collection that I passed. So I'm going through each one, and I'm effectively adding these list items, okay, because the list items is what I'm going to add to my list view, right? Remember in my code here, I'm appending to this species list, which is just the ID of the UL, or the list, okay? So I effectively have now the pagination set up. So when I hit the bottom of the page, it should now trigger this function to kick in, get more data, append it to my list, and it should now display properly. Okay. All right. So now let's run it and see what happens. Let me just check on time here. Okay. So now, all right, I should probably get rid of that prompt. But now you can see that the list loads pretty quick like it was before. And now when I get to the bottom, it happened so quick you didn't even notice probably. Right? So now I can just sit here, scroll away, and to the user, it's pretty much the same as if I, loaded the whole thing at once, right? Now, sooner or later, you're going to see it to start to slow down, right? Because remember, I'm just adding to the DOM here, right? You can almost see it there a little bit. It's starting to get a little clunky like it did before. So I don't know if I want to have this experience or not. This would require some more coding. Maybe instead of appending like I am, I would just replace, right? So you may want to consider other ways to do this. In this case, I'm just adding to the list, but you may want to do swiping instead, right? So you may want to take advantage of gestures and like swipe left, just replace what's on the screen. And in that case, you probably have to do some more calculations to show this, to identify what exactly is going to fit on the screen, or maybe limit it to 5 so you know it fits. But you kind of get the idea. There's a couple of different ways to skin the cat here. You could add those buttons to traverse back and forth or to jump to a particular page. But the point of this demonstration is that you really want to take advantage of the pagination feature of our APIs, and only load the data that you need to display. Don't load everything, okay? Just load what you need to display. Okay, so I think I kind of beat that one up enough, and you get the idea. Hopefully that was helpful. Okay, so now let's spend a couple of minutes just talking about some other things that you probably end up doing that you could shave, some milliseconds off, but you're just doing it slightly different. So in this example, a lot of times you don't just want to find everything. You want to find things that meet a certain condition, okay? And in this case, in the first example, I'm doing basically SQL inside of this condition, right? So I'm doing a product.find, and I'm saying conditions has to mean this, right? Lower description, like this. So it's effectively doing almost like a SQL-like statement inside of the conditions here. And that's not the most efficient way of doing things. A better way is to use what we call our advanced queries. And on that documentation site that goes over the ROM APIs, we have a section that describes advanced queries. And it's very similar, right? So instead of passing in this SQL type of statement, I'm doing it more in a Ruby hash type of way, right? So I'm calling the function out, calling the name of the property here, and then the operation that I'm going to perform, and then passing in this variable just like I am over here, right? So it's the same exact results, except it'll be a little bit quicker, okay? So let me show that to you now. We'll actually do that okay, so I'm going to show you, excuse me, the bad way of doing it, and then we'll show you the better way of doing it. Let me just uncomment these blocks out here so we can show you the time. And in fact, what I'm going to do, just to not be confusing, let me just comment out the little prompt that was coming up in the view. Okay, so let me just go back and show you what I did. So I added a timer here, wrapping this way of doing things. This is doing that same lookup on the fish that I did before. In this case, I'm doing a find all. Remember, that came up quite slowly. I think it was 6 seconds or something like that before, or actually it was 6 milliseconds. And here I'm doing conditions, a couple of different parameters I'm passing in. And so that's kind of like the bad way to do it. And let's see what we get. So I'm going to run it. And in this case, we're getting 21 milliseconds in kind of doing that filtering that way. Okay? So now let's run it the other way. And in this case, let's just look at the comparison here. It's the same exact statement, just formatted a different way. Instead of doing SQL inside the conditions, I'm actually doing it this hash way, and it's the same. It'll be the same data set. It's just done differently, right? So let's run it. 17 milliseconds. So again, it's not like a huge savings, right? But in some cases, it may be, depending on the size of the data set that you're looking up. So any little tweaks that you can make to improve things, the better off you will be. All right. So now, let's see. That's pretty much all I wanted to cover. Let me just jump back to the slides and make sure I didn't miss anything. So I don't have a summary slide here. Sorry, I forgot that. So just to kind of summarize, we talked about loading data, doing multiple inserts, multiple creates, multiple updates, just adding those like 6 lines of code, right, to wrap it in a transaction is a huge amount of savings, huge. And then once the data is in there, use our pagination APIs along with any garbage, enabling the garbage collection, and you'll see improved benefits in terms of application performance, right? Excuse me. So those are really kind of what I wanted to cover in terms of demonstration. As I always end the call with just kind of a quick resource of the week, this one has to do with data and generating sample data. I found that this website, I don't know who put this together, this guy, Picasso, there's the QR code for it. Particularly when you're dealing with JSON, it lets you create like an instant set of data, random data. It has these variables. There's really no documentation on it, but hey, if you just want a quick set of data, you can put in the number of rows and kind of control what those parameter names are, and boom, you can generate this nice JSON formatted string that has a huge data set in there. So check it out. I kind of find it useful, particularly when I'm just trying to test things out. And there's probably different ways to do this, but online for me is always good. I don't have to install any software, and that it always seems better. Okay, so let's jump to any questions that anybody has, and while we're doing that, let me, oh, I forgot to add the question of the week. Oh, well. All right, so I thought I added it before the call. So let's just open it up for questions here. Let me take a look and see if anybody has any questions. Yes, there are some questions. All right, so any limitations when creating a table via JSON, looking at around 25,000 records for an initial sync. You know, it's all going to depend on what's in the data set, right? So what are the different properties that you have? Do you have binary data? Obviously, that's not so great for JSON. One of the other concepts I didn't really have time to cover in today's webinar is that we have a database import and export mechanism for when you have data sets that has binary data. So I'll look to maybe focus that on a particular blog, but you can check the documentation site on it and it has some examples. So that's one example I can think of. It all depends on, you know, how you're transacting things. Okay, so Andre asked, what happens when you scroll back up? Yeah, so in my application, I just did the scroll down, right? And you notice as the DOM got bigger, the application got slower, right? But in my case, I know people are probably just going to, and particularly me, I'm just going to search. I'm not going to browse through 400 species of fish, right? So what you could do is you could add that, just like the same thing that we did on the bottom, add a hidden div on the top and do that same sort of calculation to see when that's in view, right? Load more data, and you would have to maintain 2 pages, right? The next page and the previous page, right? So you can do it that way too. That's one way to do it. And like I said before, if you just want to, if you can, avoid lists entirely, if you can, right? If that makes sense for your application, and just show what you can on the screen so you can flick back and forth, right? Some people like the list because they can do that quick flick and get to the bottom. But in this case, it only works once you keep flicking, right? So it kind of depends. Rob, can you share boundaries and limitations on the database size? Okay, yeah, so thanks, Hector. I don't have that data to share right this minute, but that's something I'll look to post as well to see if we have any data on comparing the databases between fixed and property bags. So I'll look for that. I'll look to post that. All right. People asking for the source code for my demo application. I'm going to look to provide some snippets from that application, to you guys. And somebody also was complaining about audio. Hopefully, you guys heard me okay. I do have a cold, so I apologize for that. And I'll listen to the webinar again. If it wasn't good, I'll just re-record it with better audio. So sorry about that. And let's see, is there any other questions? Okay. I don't think there's any other questions. We'll just give it another minute here. And while I just put up the next topic. Okay. Any last questions? Nope. I don't see any more. So again, next week we're going to cover the RhoMobile Suite 2.2. Hopefully it'll be available by then. And we'll go through some of the new features. Looking forward to that. And then following that, we'll be doing some sessions on RhoConnect. So I want to thank everybody for their time today. Hopefully you enjoyed this presentation. And we'll see you next time. Please leave me feedback, any questions you have at the end of the webinar when I exit it in a minute.